Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. As you will see in front of you, we just have a brief slide just to go over some of the housekeeping for our session today. And now we'll turn it over to our two hosts, to our two speakers that will start this session. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Elizabeth Galik, Executive Director of River City Community Development Center in Chicago.
And my name is Charnesha Collier, and I am the Director of Apprenticeships here at our city in Chicago.
So we're going to go ahead and share our screen. Just a moment. Yeah. Sure. Lene, you're not seeing our slides now, are you?
No, I am not.
Yes, they worked perfectly a moment ago. We'll just try one more time. Stop and try again. Do you want to refresh that maybe? Okay, they're coming. We're getting there. I find this appropriate because a lot of our session is about improvisation and the improvisation that has to happen when we're in crisis. So we learn to improvise well. All right, Miss Lene, can you confirm that you are seeing the slides and they look good?
And they do. Thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful. So our title today is Beyond the News, Using Public Crisis to Build Trusted Community. And we're presenting a case study out of our organization from last June 2020. And we're going to present how things worked in our area. We recognize that you are coming to us from very different perspectives. I'm sure all your churches are unique, your ministries are unique, your neighborhoods are unique. So hopefully some of the things that you see here can be useful to you, but we also are aware that not all of it will transfer. So just know that we're aware of that as we go. All right, so this is our case study from June 1st, 2020. This was the time immediately following the protests, following the George Floyd killing. And so we're showing how that affected our local community. As you can see, there was a lot of devastation around us locally. Shara and I were both we personally live about half a block from the store that you see here. That's my son who's helping clean up the next day with one of our neighbors. So we were kind of right in the heart of a lot of crisis in our neighborhood that day. As we remember that period of time, even as I started pulling up photos for this presentation, I could feel my chest get tight, right? You remember that we were all amid the anxiety of early COVID. No one was sure how the pandemic was going to play out. And then, of course, just all of the high emotions that surrounded the killing of George Floyd from all sides. So this is a picture from downtown Chicago. This was while protests were still peaceful early in the afternoon. This is downtown. You'll see where we are later. But obviously emotions are high, and this is what the country was seeing when they showed images of Chicago. They were seeing images of things burning, a lot of dissension, a lot of racial unrest.
So the image that we just showed you was from May 30th, and this is in front of our building at River City. This is June 2nd, so a couple days after the one of the protests downtown. And this is several of our, we have a church member there, and then we have a parent, some volunteers that there, and some of our city staff, and it shows in the background that we were giving out free groceries on June 2nd after the looting.
So what we're hoping to share with you is how an effective church or ministry can really transform something that looks terrifying to the rest of the nation into something that's really, really beautiful for your local community, that becomes a touch point that people then rely on in years of the future because it builds the relationship so closely. We're going to tell you a little bit about our context, our community in Chicago of West Humboldt Park.
Yes, so the red arrow at the top shows you where River City is located and where our community center is in Humboldt Park. So we have very different varieties of our heritages here, which is African American, Puerto Rican, and Mexican. So we see all of our kids and different families come into our buildings, but we also have different neighbors and school leaders, different organizations that open their doors to different youth. We have parents that collaborate. We're trying to stop the violence, even though all people, when they hear Chicago, they hear, yes, they're the top violent city in the States. But all of those people that I just described to you are people that are trying to come in to stop the violence. And intervene into a good way that we can have all of those youth into our spaces and have this community be more positive.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, maybe just, okay.
So here on the left is just going back to show you the strip of Grand is still where River City is located, but towards the top north is where the colors really show the Hispanic culture in their neighborhoods and where they live at. And then the bottom on the right-hand side shows the African Americans, but we're all are mixed together throughout the community. It's just not this whole block is Hispanic and this whole block is African American. We're all mixed through, but this just gives you the visual of the percentages that we have in the neighborhoods.
So our center is kind of right at that main divide between majority of one ethnicity and majority of other ethnicities come together, which is our exact favorite spot to be located. And we just love it that God gave us a building on the exact block that we would love to be on. So Shar and I are staff in the nonprofit at River City. There's also a church here. So River City Community Church is a deliberately multi-ethnic congregation, was planted that way originally by a multi-ethnic group of leaders. And the three pillars are worship, reconciliation, and neighborhood development. However, it's not a large congregation. There's about 200 who worship there on Sunday, and the budget of the community center and the church are about equal, and both under $500,000, so very, very small. And a lot of while River City is a very multi-ethnic congregation, people drive in from all over the city and the suburbs to go to church here. So the majority of the congregation is not living in the direct community, and you're going to see how that's both a challenge and an asset when crises hit our local community.
So this is going over, so we talked about the church part, but River City Community Development Center is the nonprofit organization that's branched out of the church. So our mission is that at our city, we bring together the best of our community to build a path for families to walk from cradle to career to the glory of God. So that's why we do everything that we do with our youth. So with that, we're showing our programs that we have. So we have our dream builders that start from kindergarten to 5th grade, and then our peace builders that's like 6th to 12th grade. And then we have city builders that cover from 6th to 12th grade. So that's how we model our cradle to career.
So the whole organization is built on long-term relationships, very close relationships with both our youth and our families, trying to welcome all siblings of a family at the same time, very similar to a multi-generational church model. Most of our kids are not churched yet. And so we try to replicate some of that beautiful longevity with the body of Christ in our programs. during COVID, we pivoted. Obviously, we had to close our center along with everybody else. And so we did a lot of home visits. We delivered prizes for doing your homework because our children were not, and began delivering meals. So all of this is just a little bit of background. This took place in March, April, May, and got us to the point that we were at June 1st. So the situation, I feel like whenever we're talking about situations of racial unrest, the incident that we picked to start something is very important in how we tell the story. And so as a believer, I personally go way, way back beyond the beginning to where the theology of racial difference started, which was 1452. I realize this is way before the crisis of 2020, but this was when the Catholic Church, the Pope, put out the official theology that authorized land seizure and perpetual servitude of non-European people. This gives me belief that good theology can bring us a long way out of our present crisis, but also that bad theology can last a really long time. That when this narrative of racial hierarchy was authored, it made changes that impact us today. So fast forward, roughly 500 years. March 2020, COVID arrives in Illinois. Most of you are probably familiar with that time. We all got stay-at-home orders. We had to close the center, close in-person church. We had to quickly pivot to remote learning church. In our community in particular, there are only about 4 or 5 big box stores that were allowed to be open. So if you remember during that time, the local vendors, most of them were required to be closed. This resulted in significant shortages, supply shortages in our community, because so many of our community members don't have cars. They're traveling by public transportation. Then there was the fear of getting COVID on public transportation. So it was very difficult to procure goods in our community, especially clothing and shoes, which then factors into June 1st. So Monday, May 25th, George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Saturday, May 30th, was the first day that protests downtown Chicago began to cause damages. Our neighborhood was eerily quiet on Saturday and Sunday morning. There was absolutely nothing going on. And then in our community, so throughout Chicago, there were protests that turned violent, that turned into looting. There were other neighborhoods that only saw protests and no looting. In our community, we did not have active protests. We only had looting. Shars, and my personal belief is that a lot of it was goods procurement from having the scarcity from the previous months. So this was how our very small ministry responded.
So this is where first we knew that it was important to take care of our staff first, because we knew that the trauma that we were seeing also affected our staff. So we knew that in order for us to respond to our community and the people and serve them, we needed to serve ourselves first. So we had the day off of work to just reflect and know what's going on, but we knew that our city was a safe space, that if we wanted to come together as a team, that we can come together and share and talk about what happened and what was going on and how we felt about those things.
So most of our staff live in the community, and so a lot of us had witnessed firsthand the looting the day before. Some of our staff had been very, very close to it. Some of our youth had been caught in grocery stores or laundromats that had been looted. And so besides the trauma of the larger racial unrest, there was just a lot of trauma going on for our staff. And so we began actually with giving everybody the day paid to do what they needed to do. And for some of our staff, they were too far away. They couldn't make it back, and staying home was what they needed. But others needed the healing space that Char mentioned at the center. Oops. Oops. Please hold. We went forward. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you for bearing with us. Okay. So then this was the next thing. again, as a small ministry, we don't have elaborate channels of communication set up. So this morning following the looting, really everybody in our community was in their homes. People were afraid to leave. The looting had arisen so fast the afternoon before that no one was sure, if you left your house, would you end up caught in the middle of something that you couldn't get out of? And so people were in their homes, checking social media and wanting desperately to know what happened to their community, but not wanting to go out and see it. So I took the opportunity at about 6 a.m. before anything new was happening to drive around. These are screenshots. I just put my phone on the little phone mount on the dashboard and recorded a terrible quality video. That's why we're not showing a clip, because it truly is not worth showing. But people started logging on just to say, did this store make it? Did this store make it? How is this block? And so since we usually engage with our wider body of supporters and donors and church members and former church members who have moved away, we very often do that by Facebook. We use that opportunity just to get the word out. Again, the theme you're going to see going through this is it wasn't planned or polished, but it also wasn't something new. So we knew the ways that people usually engage with us and use that to get out information. During this video, tried very hard to only narrate what I was seeing directly and looking at, not anything I had heard, not any judgments on where the situation came from or what should have been done, but really just neutral. This is what happened in this crisis to our community. This is how we can engage to help. And then because, so one of the things that happened in Chicago is that most weekdays, all the weekdays, you were able to go pick up food at any Chicago public school. But Chicago Public Schools canceled that opportunity for the upcoming Monday. So my own family, which had 5 kids living in the house at that point, had been planning to pick up food that Monday. I thought, my goodness, there are plenty of other families who I'm sure were planning to pick up their week's worth of food on Monday and now can't. And so we decided that we would serve lunch. Was just the initial thing. Can we get a few people to serve lunch at River City? Once we found out that River City itself had not fallen to the looting, which we were not initially sure, but our own building wasn't damaged. And so what we did is we reached out to the already organized groups at the church. So one of the best organized groups at River City is an advocacy group. Normally, buying groceries and serving food is not their thing. They do public policy, advocacy, things like that, but they're extremely well organized. And so you see on the slide is an email that I sent that morning that came out from that group's leader, the advocacy group's leader. They had a lot of members in the suburbs, and they were able to get the groceries, bring them in. And really that lifted a massive burden off our staff, because our staff who knew our community families could just show up at the building, and truly all day, members of this advocacy group just continued bringing groceries from their Costco's nearby their homes, which were completely intact. So again, here we worked really hard to use what are the things, the channels of communication that we already have, and use those in crisis rather than trying to make up new things, make up new messaging. We saw that go very badly for some other places around us, because then the messaging and the communication channels were not well enough vetted, that they ended up sometimes saying or broadcasting things that weren't appropriate to the moment.
So this is how we were able, so we knew, like Beth mentioned, we knew the needs of our family, and we wanted to start there first. So we knew that the school stopped giving out lunch. So we had just hot dogs and hot dog buns, and that's all we were giving out was hot dogs. And then we had people come and bring hamburgers. So we started what we had first, and then the more that people started to bring, then we were able to give out chips and different things like that just for lunch. And then we had more of the members of Rooted Rep show up with so many different grocery options, sacks of potatoes and meats and different things that really would meet the needs of our families. So what we did best was get on our phones and contact the kids that were within our program and let them know that, like, hey, we're here giving out lunch. And then we also have options that for cereal and macaroni, like anything that you may need, you can come check it out and see what we have for you to offer. But that is not why we opened up. We only opened up at first is just to provide the lunch for the kids to see us in the midst of the crisis. That's what we were open for. But then as the needs kept being met, we kept letting the kids know that what we had, and that's how we were able to serve them.
At one point, we actually sent out a text of just tell us what you need. And one mom wrote back and said, I would like a car. And I said, if a car comes our way, I will absolutely let you know. I'm sad to report that a car did not come our way and we weren't able to meet that request. But these were the types of things that we were telling our families. We love you. We're here for you. Please tell us what you need, and whatever comes our way, we'll share it. Okay. So this is a little bit of the tricky part, right? Is you have helpers in crisis who want to help. Some of that help is useful. Some of that help is not useful. People make up strange ideas sometimes in crisis that may be helpful or may not be helpful. At the same time, when you're welcoming the community, you want the community to feel at ease, right? So you don't want anyone in the community to walk up and be greeted by a helper who's maybe a little bit off, or, you know, is feeling like discussing racial politics or something like that, right? We're trying to make people feel, both our helpers and our community feel welcomed and loved and engaged. And so what we did is we used our on-the-ground ministry team, and then we supplemented with people that we already partner with. So in the background here, you see two people who are grilling hot dogs. That is the local 7th grade math teacher. So she showed up and we said, great, front lines. You know these kids and families backwards and forwards. They're gonna be so excited to see you after months of remote learning. And it was just a beautiful gift for our community. Other church members who were less familiar with the community were thrilled to drop off groceries and help organize in the back and be the behind the scenes hands and feet. And so it really fell to our team and our leadership to kind of position people in the best possible way. We also, as Shar said earlier, use a lot of youth apprentices within our training programs at our city. And so when our youth apprentices showed up and wanted to help, that was wonderful because we already know how to put them to work. And so then when the younger children would come, see the older apprentices helping serve, it was very welcoming. We also had a neighborhood mother come by. Her 2 sons were apprenticing with us, and she came out that day, and we were at that point overflowing with food. There was food everywhere. It was not organized, as you can imagine, in our little pop-up grocery giveaway. And I asked Miss Renee, knowing that she would interface with the community well because she lived there, said, Miss Renee, would you like to be the one to hand out the groceries, so that it didn't look like a top-down handout, so that it looked like a peer-to-peer handout? And God just knew exactly what we needed, because don't you know, Miss Renee had extensive experience operating a food pantry, which I had never known before, but she ran that so beautifully and was so comforting to the parents who came up. And then beautiful things arose too. So these peonies, the peonies had just bloomed in most gardens in Chicago that had peonies, had just bloomed the day or two before. And this was a random Facebook friend who was a former member of the church. She drove up with a trunk full of peonies. She had emptied her whole garden and put them in mason jars, and we got to send everyone home with a peony. She was a mother of young children who needed to return quickly to her home, but she brought what she had to offer, and people were so touched. They just loved it. Let us go back one slide, please hold. There we go.
So we, my favorite part about the really opened up a store that everything was free. And one of Beth's daughters called it River City Army. So people like, it didn't stop after June 2nd, after June 3rd. It didn't stop after that. The more our parents told us what they needed, we began to get anything that we could get our hands on. So in the picture on the right-hand side, we have like tables of clothes for like various sizes for young boys, young girls, older girls. And we like just set it out. So that's what, like, we had clothing options available, because how we talked about earlier, most of the stores, like our big brand stores, were closed. The nearest like Walmart that was close to our community got looted, and they didn't really open that back until a couple months ago, honestly. So that's where people would get clothes and shoes and stuff from. So we knew that that was the need next down from the food. So we got clothes and we got shoes that people would donate, and we opened up our garage door and we let families come through and walk around and take whatever they needed. But the clothes kept coming, people kept donating clothes. And then we had deodorant, like different household needs became a need, different pharmaceutical needs that families needed. We started getting those donated in and just letting them come around and come through and set up appointments with us, because we were still being mindful of COVID, but they were setting appointments with us to come and walk through and get anything that they would be needed. And some of our families were giving back to what we had and dropping off clothes that they didn't need. So it was all working out for the good of our community, and we just kept going. Whenever we got donations, we let families know, we got this. If you need this, you can come through at this time. We kept it going because the needs were there.
So it's important, of course, to talk financial integrity in crisis. So when I put out my original Facebook video, I also knew I raise most of my personal support. So I have supporters across the nation. And I knew that they would want to help. And one of my big beliefs is when the body of Christ wants to help, we give them a way to help. But that requires financial management and transparency, because the last thing you want to do is raise more money than you can distribute to the community, spend it on your own ministry, and have that all revealed later that you benefited from this crisis. That's just all sorts of icky, and no one wants to be that organization. So we actually had so many goods flowing through our organization. People would just come and bring so many clothes and pharmacy items and all of this that we ended up with extra cash because we weren't buying any of the items that we were giving away.
And we also wasn't paying any of our apprentices during that time to be working. So that was another way that we had extra cash as well.
So what we decided to do was, the picture on the top left is Cameron Elementary School. This is where most of our participants come from. It's an elementary school for 750 children of all the different ethnicities of our neighborhood. And so we were able to go to graduation and hand an envelope with $30 cash to each graduate, because one of the main crises that we heard from the parents and the youth who came in is that they would now not be able to celebrate graduation. And if there's one thing our community does really well, is celebrations. We celebrate big around here. And so the fact that people couldn't get party supplies, they couldn't get dresses, frankly, you couldn't even get cash because the banks and ATMs had all been, so for us to get those little envelopes of cash for each person, we were driving to neighborhoods away to be able to try to access the banks. But in the integrity of passing on exactly what we had been given to the community, that was how we did that. And that was actually the exact fundraiser that was chosen by our auditors for auditing. So we were very glad that we had done all our due diligence and kept track of our donations and made sure that they were distributed.
Yeah, so a part about the families not being able to celebrate, we also had snow cones out front. So we passed out the cash at Cameron, but told them, if you guys want to go over to our city, we had snow cones out, like graduation props to like take pictures, to do whatever we could for the families, for them to feel like they had really, hit a milestone and graduated 8th grade. We also gave out different goodie bags for 8th grade and kindergarten, which is the picture in the bottom left. We had different snacks. They love hot chips and drinks. So we had their favorites in there, with also, I think, Subway gift cards for them, because they love going to our Subway that we have right on the corner by our city. So we just knew what they would like and just give them a gift. They thought that the $30 was it, but like we gave every one of our city graduates a nice personalized gift for them.
And on the right, you see the picture of our graduation dress boutique. I don't know if any of you who work with youth have the issue that the girls always hang out in the bathroom, but our girls always hang out in the bathroom. So we transformed it into a sparkly graduation dress boutique where they could pick out free graduation dresses. And then what arose was really some deeper needs so we spent basically the next month in giveaways, the entire month of June, before we were able to reopen children's programs in July. This girl here is my goddaughter. I hadn't been able to see her through all of COVID, but she ended up living at our house so that her mom could go work. So there were really much deeper needs that were then revealed. Church members started raising money for rent support. They were able to deliver rent support to families that applied for it. So there were deeper long-term interventions that arose out of the kind of surface level interventions we could do first. We apologize. Thank you for bearing with us.
Apple is being crazy with me.
All right, so we're wrapping up our slideshow, luckily, since the computer wants to show different things. But what we wanted to say in summary was the reminder that this all goes one step at a time. So the verse where Jesus says, do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we wear? Maybe just stop the sharing. Okay, yeah. So we'll just tell you our last slide. This verse where Jesus says, please do not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about itself. When we entered in June 1 and June 2, we had no idea how this was going to play out. But the next verse that we believe is when people asked John the Baptist how they should repent, he made it beautifully simple, right? I don't know how I would respond if the general public asked me how to repent. I would have a lot of answers. And John said, whoever has 2 shirts should share with the one who only has 1, and whoever has food should do the same. And so what we were able to do was just take the little that we had. We don't have a huge budget. We don't have a lot of outdoor space. We use this little strip of sidewalk, but just to share what we have and open that to the community, and then to watch what God brought the next day and the next day and the next day. So believing that the most powerful thing in crisis is to be present with the people that you love, that you've been present with before, and then to go from there, to act on what God brings you and just be faithful with one thing at a time. So we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions, because I know that some of this will apply to your context, some of it will not apply to your context, and we wanted to be able to open up a good discussion so that you could engage with what we did and think about how that may affect your ministries.
So I'm looking at the Q&A now. I don't see any questions, but if any of the participants have questions, just feel free to submit them now. If not, then we might, if you all have anything else you would like to share, we might be able to end this session. Okay, it looks like there's one question that's coming in now. We're just waiting for this person to submit their question. Okay, so the first question is, what programming are you currently running?
you want to cover it?
Sure. So right now we are operating our Dream Builders program, which we pick kids up from our local school, Cameron, which we mentioned, and we bring them over here for after school programming where they do different cooking, STEM activities, art activities, gym activities. While it's been warmer, we've been taking advantage of that and taking them out for park days in different parks around our community. We also have our Harambe apprentice program where we teach kids 12 to 18 the skill of tuck pointing. So we're operating that right now. And we're also operating our print shop program. And that's where our middle school, junior high youth get to express themselves through art and then also earn different incomes doing print shop. They do screen printing, they come up with their own designs. So it's really exciting to see just even us presenting what the last year looked like for us for programming, now to be like back in full effect with our kids. It's just so great. We added a mentoring program for our junior high youth, which is everything now is just going great.
Okay. And the next question is, how has that programming benefited or been changed by what you learned during the pandemic?
Yeah, so it was immediately changed kind of drastically. So after our staff came in on June 1st, we never went back home again. I'm a little sad. I feel like I missed my pandemic opportunity to live in my pajamas for longer than I did. But as we were running COVID safe summer programming that summer, of course, the main panic of the families was the approaching remote education. So we ended up opening a remote learning center that lasted the entire school year of 2020, 2021. That was a 52% increase in programmatic expense for us. So as we talk about pivoting as the spirit leads, that was a scary one. It was a little easier to hand out hot dogs than it was to increase expense by 52%, but God provided with grantors who had some extra funds from things that had been canceled. I'd say the lasting effect on our programs is the deepened relationships with families. And the understanding of the blocks that the children live on. So again, most of our staff live within 5 blocks of our community center, but the violence in our community is almost in like micro areas. So you can literally live 2 blocks away from one block will have a lot of violence. You'll live 2 blocks away and have nothing on your block whatsoever. And so as we drove to kids' houses again and again and met with their parents again and again, we really started, it was actually part of why we leave Park Day in our schedule. I have volunteers come and they're like, you're just playing with them? Aren't you gonna do some lessons or something? And I'm like, you know what? Our children can't play outside. They can't run around on their blocks. Their parents are not walking them 5 blocks away to the park, which is how far we have to walk them. And so it's little things like that, that the more we knew their homes and their blocks intimately, we could adjust programming based on that.
Okay, thank you for that. So we have another programming question. It asks for your apprenticeship program, is there a clear pathway to recognize apprenticeships?
Can you define recognize a little bit better?
Okay, I'll wait for that person to respond to that. I'll move on to another question. So when you think about the way you engaged on Facebook was by describing what you saw and being neutral. How come? Racial inequity, disinvestment, and abuse led to this moment. Why not talk about it?
Absolutely. And I, yes, Eric has been a supporter of our programs for a long time. So I love that he's pushing me on this. This is magnificent. So Eric, as I was watching the looting from my house, so we were watching with our neighbors, Char and I live on the same block actually, and it goes into a commercial corridor, and we were watching Foot Locker being looted with neighbors of all different ethnicities and backgrounds. And we could hear a who turned out to be a pastor of a local church on a bullhorn, like trying to preach a sermon to the looters, and was live streaming it on Facebook. Now, I'm not actually sure what he was saying because we could only hear the megaphone. But the weight of what you say at that moment is so, so heavy, right? You need to say it correctly. And it's really easy to not say it correctly. And so we definitely crafted meaningful statements. They're still on our website, actually, but that was not me putting it into that. I drafted something, I ran it by our entire staff, we ran it by our high-level apprentices, we ran it by our diverse board, and then we said something. So River City Church, our pastor very often engages around issues of white supremacy. He was busy doing what he does. Again, what you do well, it's like a time to stick to your lane, right? So Pastor Daniel is always our mouthpiece on these issues. And he was talking to his people, crafting meaningful statements. He ended up opening up a podcast for our Black elders to be able to host a podcast and talk about these issues. But for me to try to philosophize on that morning is just fraught with disaster. So I prefer to go back to my people and hear what they're saying and then reflect that in a meaningful way before I put a statement out there. But again, that's also because I'm more of a hands person and less of a words person. So it's a little bit stained with what I'm good at.
Okay, that's awesome. So we have a next one. It's more of a comment instead of a question, but it says, thank you for sharing what you have done at our city. It is a beautiful testimony to the love of Christ you brought and shown by example to the community. Blessings are wished to you and the team. And then we have another question that asks, what is the top secret to how your ministry responded to the crisis, which you could recommend for how another ministry might respond?
I have one thing to say, and that would be to use what you have first, not think that, oh my God, I need to go out and buy all of this stuff and do all of this stuff, but you should see what you have first and respond to that immediate need. And that's what we saw. And once we responded to the one need, things started to fall in place after. More things started to come through for our families, and we began to offer clothes, and then people started donating pharmaceutical needs, and then we were able to offer that. So it was like we started with what we had first, which was just hot dogs and hot dog buns, and then we had a whole store of our own in our building.
Yeah, I would echo that and say, don't pause to convene all the committees and all the brainstorming and if you have people who can respond quickly in a meaningful way and honor the relationships that are already there, I think that's important. And then the Holy Spirit and the people of God respond to that and move from there.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and circle back to that question about the apprenticeship programs. So by recognize, Edgar is saying, recognize apprenticeships might be one where local unions embrace the program to ensure that program participants have a sponsor or an advocate to help them get into a skilled trades program.
I feel
so
like
with that in mind,
Mr. Russell is reading our emails, I feel like. So our apprenticeship program has been independent, but we're in the middle of setting up a meeting with our local union and then with some of the people who are in charge of our state apprenticeships. So that is a little bit the weak spot of our apprenticeship program, is that we train our youth really, really well. They come out with 6 years tuck pointing experience, but we don't necessarily have a certificate that people outside us recognize. Does that sound right?
Mm-hmm.
okay. So Eric has another question. When George Floyd was killed, he said, my church responded with what I thought was slowly, maybe more accurately at the speed of our white fragility could handle. Did you all have pushback on the way you responded? Too political, slow, fast, etc.?
I don't think so, because we were like out in the community with our families, with our kids. And I mean, it was conversations around like just informal of like giving them the space to share how they felt about the things and what did they think about it, what have they seen, and then like any ways that we can help engage in that conversation to help things make sense to them. But we were also experiencing ourselves, so we needed it to make sense to us first before we were like able to put out the right message, because we wanted, that's what we wanted, to put out the right message instead of like something that goes against our mission or goes something that was just like too quick for us to not even like take the time to think. So I think by us utilizing what we had to meet the needs of our families and being out with that garage door open Monday through Friday is like what was helping them see that we were there and we were understanding the crisis that was happening.
Yeah, I think what made it kind of, yes, River City also has a lot of people with strong opinions in our congregation, absolutely. But I think, so the reason we kind of went over what the programs had looked like before that is because June 1st was really just a continued extension. So we had been delivering meals, we had been delivering groceries to people's homes. This was the first time we opened up the center. But we had really, it wasn't something that someone could look like and say, oh, this is their response to the George Floyd killing, and maybe it should have been this way. It was more, no, this is what our city has done since March. And it's been a little pivot to make it more accessible and to bring people together for the first time. But really, because it was just what we do, I think it was not, I mean, we didn't, if there was criticism, then the pastoral team protected us from it because it would have gone to them and not us, but we didn't hear about it, I think, because it was what people expect from us.
And how long did you all bring them along?
Sorry, can you say that again?
How long did you all bring them along?
Oh, you know what? I think so. This is the beautiful thing about a church community center partnership, is that we really rely on our church to do the preaching part. And so very quickly, the elders convened. I mean, the elders also gave themselves time to rest because there were a lot of elders that were facing the trauma of this situation. But then they convened very, very meaningful responses in sermons, brought in several Black guest preachers who could speak to things in a way different from our lead pastor who's white. And so we were really able to let them carry the strength of words and to do words and worship well during that time. And we could keep doing the serving part of it. So we don't underestimate what that brings to our ministry, that they do that part.
Okay, thank you. And this looks like it might be the last question. So how do you continue to engage the families who have been helped? Is there an intentional way to share the gospel with them?
I think it's all about us also being back open fully with inviting all of our families. Like we didn't see them as the help that we gave them. Like we just know that like, hey, that's that track one or that's that like we know them as the families in the relationships. So we know that like anything that we have going on in this building, so many of our families are going to be here, they're going to participate, and we just continue to love on them through their participation and through different ways that we just like reach out and connect through our Instagram, through our Facebook. Like I said, we go and pick up the kids from school. So we have kids that we have had in our summer programs that are not during after school, but we take the time to sit there and talk to them while we're waiting on the other kids to come back to the building. So we do different check-ins with all the families that we have seen come through our building.
And all of our programs, even if they're going out tuck pointing for the day, they always start with devotions, and gospel presentations are a regular part of that. So we really rely on those long-term, deeper relationships to share the gospel just one devotion, one lesson at a time over the years that they're with us.
Thank you both. It looks like we don't have any more questions. And so I just wanted to check in with both of you to see if you had any more information you wanted to share or closing remarks before we end this session.
I don't think so. The last slide that we missed just had both of our emails on there, but we can drop those in the chat for anyone who would want to use them.
All right, well, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today. We'll end this session for now and hope you all have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.